one of our top stories this afternoon, that appointment of Phineas Mojapelo to head the 3-member independent panel to look into the circumstances surrounding the docking of a Russian vessel in the Western Cape. Mojapelo will be joined by Advocate Leah Gcabashe, Senior Counsel, and Enver Surty as the other members of the panel. That panel has been given 6 weeks to conclude the investigations and will present the findings of the report to the President. Let's get some reaction now with Kobus, Marais, who is the Member of Parliament and DA Shadow Minister of Defense. Kobus, thank you so much for making time for us this afternoon. So the panel will look into the circumstances of the docking of that Russian vessel. Do you think this will bring about the answers that you and many others have been seeking since last year on why this vessel was here?
Good afternoon to your viewers as well. Well, we hope so. The fact that it's a judicial commission, or at least chaired by a retired judge, we certainly hope that, those requirements will be met and will be applied. It is obviously important to see the precise terms of reference of this commission, because there's quite a number of pieces of information that must be revealed, and if not, then this is not worth, worth the paper that it will be written on. It is important that we must know why was the Lady R officially allowed to bypass official ports of entry, portnet ports of entry, and basically abuse the naval base for offloading and loading of cargo, whatever that was. We know that the Americans has forewarned South Africa that the Lady R, who never had South Africa as its destination, official destination, came to Cape Town, and nothing was done to prevent the Lady R. In fact, we even approved 2 Navy vessels to escort the Lady R into False Bay and Simonstown Naval Base. Remember, naval bases are never used for the commercial import and export of any munitions, whatever that might be, small or big or sensitive or not sensitive. They never are used for that. So there must be reasons, and somebody knew that the freight that was on the vessel or that was to be loaded will probably not pass the requirements at the official points of entry, where all government agencies are present. So those things are very important. And then obviously, the Lady R's cargo manifest, if that is up to date and in terms of international requirements and standards, it must reveal what was on the vessel when it came to South Africa and what was loaded onto the vessel when it left. And obviously then we need to know government's involvement, because we know that AB Logistics, which is the logistical company belonging to Arms Corps, was responsible for the freight, handling of the freight and delivering of the rounds and shells from Russia to our ammunition depot. So there's no ways that these things can just happen in a vacuum, where the political overseers, the minister and the commander-in-chief, would not know about that. And obviously, what is the role of DIRCO in this whole matter?
Well, the political overseers themselves, Kobus, have already distanced themselves from this alleged incident, which then leads me to the question of what you think is the true purpose of this panel. Government has already said, we didn't supply the arms to Russia. Not only was it the arms committee, but the defense minister, the minister in the presidency, the president himself, they've all said we didn't do it. So are they doing this then to somehow placate the U.S.?
Well, I tell you, then they are certainly standing back from any responsibility and accountability. And if something like this can happen at the naval base, Simonstown, which is our biggest and most important naval base, that will be a major catastrophe in terms of a breach of security, a national breach of security. And that we cannot allow, because if this is what is allowed now, what can happen, some other time? And how can it be abused? Because this is a precedent that has been created. We know that something was loaded. There's no doubt about that. There is more than enough evidence of that. It is whether they are prepared to agree to basically, to admit to that, or whether they are again will be throwing some staff member under the bus. There's no ways in hell that you could, relinquish security, control measurements in Simonstown during 3 nights, consecutive nights, and then tell me nobody knew about that. That is the biggest BS on earth.
Government has always been cagey about this Russian vessel for so long, since in fact its arrival and that dawn departure. Who do you think this panel should look to for information, people that can testify? I mean, there are some people in the maritime industry you've spoken to who mentioned how they spotted this ship on their automatic information system, and apparently the vessel was not even calling or communicating with any of the South African ports. And then at some point, it switched off its AIS system and reappeared later in Simonstown. So there was a lot of activity on the ship, even at dawn, during power cuts. So there are many questionable things that clearly transpired here. So who do you think the panel should look to get that information that a lot of us are not privy to?
Well, first of all, it is the naval base. It's the responsibility of the Chief of the Navy. Yes, at that stage it was a new Chief of the Navy, but he is still responsible and in charge of the naval base. He's also stationed in Simonstown. So will be the first person. Then secondly, obviously because he falls under the Chief of the SANDF, the Chief of the SANDF, the Minister of Defence, but then also, remember, AB Logistics is the logistical company belonging to Arms Corps. So obviously they will have to look at least the CEO of Arms Corps to come clean with all the information that they have possessed, because they have arranged the trucks. So they would be able to tell us who has approved this, why was it bypassed, and then obviously, any other person involved in those transactions and where the cargo was offloaded. Where the cargo was offloaded is important to know whether there was documentations with this cargo. And because if there were no documentation and the documentation was in line with NCACC requirements and regulations, then it means it was unlawful. It will also be important to approach the NCACC to find out whether there was an application for an extension of this import permit and whether there was any application for any conveyance of ammunition or munitions onto the vessel. Remember, I've heard that it was a donation. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's a donation or whether it was bought for the purposes of permits. You need a permit, even if it's a conveyance permit, even if it's munitions from another country in South Africa has been used, just as a channel to load it onto the Lady R. Whether it was for Russia, whether it was for the Wagner Group, even in Africa, we need to know exactly what was loaded on. And I think if you start there with those big people, then you should have all the answers. That should be very, very easy.
Here's the challenge, though, Kobus. The presidency says this panel must establish who are the people who were aware of the ship's arrival and if there were contents that were loaded or offloaded, which for me raises another serious question. How can a cargo ship, a vessel of that size, dock on our waters without the knowledge of our authorities? I mean, is it possible that the president and his security establishment don't actually know whether or not this happened? I mean, government's ignorance about the activities at our own naval base with big security implications is actually quite worrying.
It is a huge concern. My view is that they are just not prepared to admit failure. Again, a huge security breach and failure. Because remember, Simonstown Naval Base is the worst place on earth if you want to do something in secrecy. Many retired naval personnel and even, leadership of the Navy in the past, they reside against that mountain, that Simonstown mountain. They've got an unlimited and unrestricted view on down to the harbor. So for them, it was immediate, here is something wrong. Why was I very much aware already on the Tuesday night of this vessel arriving in Simonstown? Why was I aware since the next morning of activities during the night and photographs and people, confirming me? Why was I aware who to contact and say, General this, Admiral this, CEO, Advocate this? What is going on? I mean, I knew at that stage already that AB Logistics was involved. I even knew exactly who was the person who was delegated to be with the freight and accompany the freight to the ammunition depot. So if I'm able to find that out on the first day already, surely government and the commander-in-chief will have the resources and the people to find out even more than what I did. So it is just unacceptable if they stand back and say we know nothing. So the Minister of Defense, and I don't want to use her words of the F word that she used, but she is clearly, either she's totally wrong or she's not got a clue of what is going on in the Defense Force, and that is a breach that we cannot afford, and then we must replace them.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, whatever outcome comes out of this inquiry, is it likely to help us with our tensions with the U.S.? I mean, if they come out and this panel says there were no weapons that were loaded onto Lady R, I'm wondering whether the U.S. then is going to somehow dial down on what it's been communicating to the public. Do they stick with the intelligence that they have? I mean, the U.S. ambassador was quite stern in that I bet with my life that there were some weapons that were loaded there. So is there anything that this panel can say to try and ease those tensions that we have with the U.S., especially given that, even in the midst of what's been going on with the investigations around whether or not Russia was supplied with arms, we've really been, visiting Russia. I mean, it wasn't just the army chief. The minister in the presidency recently just returned from Russia. The ANC sent its own delegation, and that's not to say the ANC must stop its friendship with Russia, but the timing of all of this, the U.S. will look at it very closely and think, what's going on here?
Absolutely. And one must remember, your defense force, any defense force, must be a foreign policy tool and a tool in protecting your most important international investment and trade relations. And this seems to be quite the contrary. To say, we will do whatever we want. We are a sovereign country. We can do whatever we want to whoever. It is about the timing. It's not about the relationships with Russia per se. It's not the fact that we have had an exercise with Russia with little or no value to us. It was about the timing and the perception that is created. Remember, the Russian news agency TASS has basically told the whole world what they are intend to do and what they have done here, and the visit by the general to Russia. They didn't tell us, even in Parliament, but the Russian news agency TASS, they sent it all over the world. So that is megaphone diplomacy, to use the words of the ANC. So clearly what they can do, if that panel finds out and confirm that yes, something was loaded, this is what was loaded, and yes, here is confirmation that it was done either legally, and here's a documentation, or it was done illegally, and someone will be held accountable for that, whether it is the minister or the chief of the Navy or the CEO of AB Logistics and Arms Corps. But there must be consequence, because remember, what the ambassador has said is basically a corroboration of what we have said. Something was loaded, and it was not apples and pears.
Yeah. Kobus, Marais, DA Shadow Minister of Defense, also Member of Parliament. Thank you for making time for us.